And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us. Let's keep moving with more of these executive actions that President Trump has now made on the first full day as president yet again, especially some of these foreign policy moves, national security moves, and the like. Well, his pick to be Secretary of State, former Florida Senator Marco Rubio, was unanimously confirmed by the Senate just yesterday and was sworn in as the next Secretary of State just today. I want to put this up here. Rubio saying, "I'm grateful to POTUS for the confidence he has placed in me to serve as Secretary of State. The direction he has given for the conduct of our foreign policy is clear. Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, every policy we pursue must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? Or does it make America more prosperous?" Well, let's get up to speed with our colleague and friend there at the Pentagon for Fox, correspondent Jennifer Griffin with the latest. Let's listen.
Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Linda Fagan was relieved of duty by President Trump's acting Homeland Security Secretary due to a failure to address border security threats and an excessive focus on DEI. Fagan was the first woman to lead any branch of the U.S. military. The Pentagon is now accelerating deployment orders after President Trump ordered active duty troops to the border.
The cartels are now going to be seen as foreign terror organizations. Would you think about ordering U.S. Special Forces into Mexico to take them out?
Could happen. Stranger things have happened.
Trump has not ruled out using the military to reclaim the Panama Canal.
China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama.
Panama's president pushed back. Quote, "I must reject in its entirety the words expressed by President Donald Trump. There is no presence of any nation in the world that interferes with our administration." President Trump removed former Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley from DHS's National Infrastructure Advisory Council today. General Milley was appointed by President Trump in 2019, but numerous books have detailed Milley's private criticism of President Trump. With no explanation, General Milley's new portrait as the 20th chairman of the Joint Chiefs was removed Monday from the hallway where it was unveiled 11 days ago. This morning, maintenance workers were busy taking the hooks off the wall that held the portrait and painting over the holes.
We asked them who gave the orders for them to do that, and they said it was above their pay grade. But one worker told us they were, quote, told to make it look like the portrait was never there. At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
Jennifer, thanks so much. So there was a lot in there, a lot packed in there in that report. We're going to get to all of it with our friend there, national security analyst and expert, and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you. Boy, is there a lot to get to, and let's get to it. So first I want to start, though, our conversation. There is a new Secretary of State in town, former Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Hal, what do you make of his meetings today on the first day of the job with his counterparts from India and Japan and Australia? What does that say about how Rubio is going to act as Secretary of State?
Andrew, I'd say he'd hit the ground running. He had a very warm reception by the staff, if you will, by all the workforce at the State Department. They very, very hearty applause, and it certainly felt sincere from what I could see. They were glad to see him there. Of course, he's got a strong background. He was in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was on the Intelligence Committee, so he knows international affairs. He also did a bilingual greeting. He said it in English and Spanish, and then showed a little bit of humor. When he was done, he actually, when he got through with the Spanish, he said, he turned to somebody who asked him what he said, and he said, I saved a lot of money buying my car insurance from Geico, and everybody started laughing because that's not what he said. But he just has a kind of a very, something they like in the State Department. You have that ability to communicate, to joke, to basically ingratiate yourself on others. That's the heart of diplomacy, and that's what I think the State Department was glad to see, was that they were getting somebody who had those kind of innate skills, if you will. The other thing he brought to it, along with the number of officials, or I should say foreign officials that he met with right away, making it very clear what America's policy was going to be, he also dug right into looking at various different policies the State Department has. He's looking at the State Department aid policies. some of the things that they do overseas in that regard. Also, probably some programs that they have here in the United States where we host foreign groups and individuals that come over. So he's putting a 90-day pause on that. So a lot of things that he packed into his first day, and he, as Jennifer Griffin mentioned, he was unanimously confirmed by the Senate. He got 99 votes. In fact, the only vote he didn't get in the Senate was from the senator who was the vice president. That was the only one that he didn't get. So, and he couldn't vote because he's well, technically, I guess he could if it was a tie vote, but it was not even close. But it was just a remarkable send off. That's the very first confirmation from the Senate,
right,
of all the nominees. So I don't think all of them are going to get quite the same number. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and predict that. But yeah.
Hal, I want to move from the State Department now to the U.S. Coast Guard. And we've been talking in our previous segment was about a president's prerogative to hire and fire and how hard it is. And maybe it's not so hard when it comes to some of the chiefs of the armed forces and the branches like the Coast Guard. We learned this yesterday, according to Reuters. That's Idris Ali, the reporter, that a U.S. official confirming U.S. Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Linda Lee Fagan, the first female uniformed leader of an armed forces branch, has been fired by the Trump administration. So I was going to ask you how hard it is for a president to fire a branch leader of one of the services. Clearly not that difficult. Why was she fired? What are you hearing?
Well, there was a lot of things. First off, there's some operational issues that they were looking at. They felt that she was focused too much on internal things within the Coast Guard. DEI, of course, anything tied to that is a hot button issue with the Trump administration. And so the feeling was she was focused on that. But one of the big things with the Coast Guard, and it's not something that she started by any means, but something that just hasn't been corrected probably as fast as anyone would like, is recruiting. The Coast Guard is way down. They've got thousands of empty slots. They simply can't recruit, and that is what they cited was a leadership failure in recruiting. A failure to put the focus on, they call it border security. You're talking about the maritime borders when you're talking with the Coast Guard primarily, but that was what they cited. But I will say one thing: when you are an officer in any of the armed forces, and yes, I do know the Coast Guard is under the Department of Homeland Security, so it's technically not under the Pentagon. It's not under the Department of Defense, but the same rules apply to the Coast Guard. You serve at the pleasure of the president.
I see.
And because of that, the president can at any time remove you from office if you're a commissioned officer, and that happened. And it's very rare. It's unusual, but it's not the first time. I mean, if you go back in history, many senior generals, admirals have been relieved, fired, if you will, for various different reasons. So it's not unprecedented.
So I'm going to ask you, though, did it have something to do with border enforcement, especially in international waters here? Fox's Bill Malugin, Hal, is reporting this, that in response to Trump's executive orders, the Coast Guard has announced it will immediately surge boats, cutters, aircraft, and specialized forces to the southeast border around Florida to prevent mass illegal migration from Haiti and Cuba. And it will also surge resources to the maritime border around Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Also, the maritime border between the Bahamas and South Florida, and the southwest maritime border between the U.S. and Mexico in the Pacific, the maritime border between Texas and Mexico in the, get this, in the statement, Hal, I'm going to read it again, the maritime border between Texas and Mexico in the Gulf of America, and support to Customs and Border Protection on maritime portions of the southwest U.S. border. So I'm going to ask again, could the relieving of the command, the firing, be due to problems that the incoming Trump administration had with the Coast Guard's border enforcement mechanisms and the success or lack of in that? And one of these other executive orders was renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And I believe this is the first instance in any kind of federal statement in the U.S. government whatsoever with a reference to the Gulf of America. That's quite stunning. What do you make of that? That was very rapid. Obviously, when the president signs it, sometimes it's immediate.
To say a whirlwind of executive orders would be an understatement. It's just to say unprecedented doesn't even really capture just how many executive orders have come out. But yes, that's the first time I've seen. He made the statement, he signed it, but it's also the first time I've seen that in another order where they referenced the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America and the name change of the United States. By the way, it's not unusual for countries around the world to name places with a name that they prefer. For example, China, when they talk about Vladivostok, a number of cities in Siberia and around the border of China, they actually refer to them by their Chinese name, not by the Russian name. And there's a direct reason why they do that. But we've called, we've obviously made this official or executive order about the Gulf of America. So they have referenced it. But the truth is there is a lot of maritime smuggling, people, drugs. That's another big one. And he's hitting all the places. If you're talking about Guam, I've spent quite a bit of time in Guam and Saipan out in the Pacific. I can tell you those that's the quintessential maritime borders. That's what they are.
Okay.
But then you're talking about the borders coming into the U.S. I find it interesting the focus on Florida. That's probably primarily more focused on human trafficking than anything else coming out of Cuba and other countries in there. But they're looking at the flood of human trafficking coming in across the borders. The other thing too, though, I would point out, and this has always been the truth with smuggling across the borders, when you put a lot of pressure in one place, right now there's a lot of pressure going into the southwest border, the land border. Not a lot of maritime border between Mexico and the U.S., but the land border. A lot of focus on that. When you do that, there is something we've often referred to as a toothpaste squeezing effect. You squeeze that area, and the other part of the toothpaste tube gets bigger.
Interesting.
And the other part of the toothpaste tube is actually the maritime border. This happened, if you want to go back to the 90s and the 80s, this happened with drug smuggling. We put a lot of pressure on stopping the smuggling into Florida, the old Miami Vice days and all that stuff. We put a tremendous amount of effort in that. Well, the drug smugglers said, okay, and they all shifted to the west, and that's how the southwest border became this, this super highway of drugs and people and everything, was because we put so much pressure there. So they're you could kind of say what they're doing here is more anticipatory, and it may be that again the president picks who he prefers to be the heads of various services and stuff.
Right.
That is a very political position, and there may be somebody in the Coast Guard that he has in mind that he'd prefer to be the commandant, and that's certainly his choice, his decision.
Yes, and we'll be on the lookout for that name. Hal, while we have you though. Obviously, we refer to you as a national security analyst. That means you know something about what it means and what it takes to get a security clearance in the federal government. Back out live there to the White House, because one of these executive orders, because there are so many, we're doing our best here on Live Now to really dive into some of the most important ones, most controversial ones, most impactful ones. This one, though, coming from Trump, planning to suspend the security clearances of dozens of former intelligence community officials who wrote an infamous letter about Hunter Biden ahead of the 2020 election. So a Trump administration official telling Fox Trump's expected action would be directed at the 51 ex-officials who lied about Hunter Biden's laptop in that letter, which was published 2 weeks before the election. Now, among the letter's signatories were 3 former CIA directors, including John Brennan, as well as the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. It's unclear whether all of these 51 individuals still possess security clearances. We'll get an update on that if we have it. Trump said in 2018 that he used his presidential authority to revoke Brennan's, but Brennan later said he was uncertain about whether the revocation ever actually took place. And so actually, Hal, while we dive into the story, Jennifer Griffin does have some reporting on these security clearances. She says a CIA spokesperson telling Fox the CIA has complied with the executive order President Trump issued on Monday, revoking the security clearances of 50 former intelligence and high-ranking government officials who signed the letter in 2020 that called into question the veracity of Hunter Biden's laptop. You'll remember that many of these 51 signatories described it as a Russian disinformation operation. And so all throughout the campaign, Hal, and since really the 2020 election, you know, a lot of people know Trump has cited this as election interference, citing that that is one of the reasons why he lost the 2020 election. Of course, he does not believe he lost the 2020 election here. So is this, to you, just a president doing what a president can do, or is there more to it?
Well, obviously, there's a couple of different ways you can look at this, but certainly it is well within the scope of what a president can do. Ultimately, the president has adjudication and adjudication authority, and of course, suspension revocation authority on any security clearance. It's a trust and confidence issue, and I'm just going to explain the rationale here. Is that the president feels, and many around him feel, that then when they signed that letter, they were signing it and it wasn't true and factual. That's their interpretation, that what they said was not factual, that after a time, they felt that the facts of the matter on Hunter Biden had come out, that the laptop was actually his laptop, that it was a genuine article, that it was not a Soviet or Russian, a Russian disinformation thing or something like that. And that's why the president basically said, look, if you lied in this official document, which caused, and certainly for him caused great political harm, he doesn't trust you, and it's a matter of trust and confidence by the president if you hold the clearances. Now, This has an impact on those individuals. Many of them, they may be retired from the federal government. I don't recall if all of them are, but many of them, and probably not now, because that's another thing he did, was he basically went through and kind of cleaned house, and it still is on a number of committees, councils, commissions throughout the government. And there's many retired government officials that sit on a variety of committees, advisory committees, councils and stuff that that may have retired from federal service or government service, but they sit on these things. And because of that, they hold an extremely high security clearance. It's an active security clearance. Also, a number of them consult or are employed within the intelligence, various companies that support the intelligence community, the defense industrial sector, things like that. So this doesn't, it's not just something where it's punitive to say no. This can have a dollars and cents impact on all those individuals, because if they don't have the clearance, they can't sit on those committees, they can't hold those jobs, they can't hold those positions. And most of my recollection is most of the clearances out there are actually in the private sector, not the public sector. That's just one of those little fluky things. That's where our defense industrial base is kind of set up.
So, Hal, obviously these actions are being perceived as Trump going after some of his most vociferous critics now that he is back in the White House. But to your point, the rationale, the underpinning for this move today is if you're the former director of the CIA or the former director of national intelligence and you sign on to a letter stipulating that something is a Russian psyop, essentially, shouldn't you have the information at your fingertips because of your high security clearance to know better?
Well, you may or may not have that intelligence, but when they signed that letter, they were saying, "Hey, we think this is, this is our assessment. This is a Soviet." I said it again. Sorry,
it's okay.
Russian disinformation. It's classic Soviet, a Soviet tradecraft, but I mean, it's Russian disinformation. It's psyops, if you will. Basically, it's an information operation meant to change the outcome of the election or something like that. And they signed off on it. And the truth of the matter is that is typical of Russian disinformation operations. So in terms of tradecraft, yes, that is truthful. However, they signed off and said that that this was what I just mentioned.
Sure.
And over time, the facts have kind of emerged in the matter. As near as I can tell, I haven't seen anything different. That the laptop was his laptop.
Sure. No, it was. It was his laptop.
It was. And they were kind of indicating that it was a plant or something like that. And I think that's where certainly President Trump, but others around him are just feel very strongly that these guys, jumped the gun. They stepped beyond what they should have done, they went beyond the bounds of what their office would require, that they basically got involved with partisan politics.
Yeah.
Is kind of what they're implying, and so that's a part of the rationale there.
Hal, speaking of some of these other actions that Trump is deploying to go after more of his vehement critics, we did get the news today that he is canceling effective immediately his former national security advisor, John Bolton's Secret Service detail, to which John Bolton replied there on X today saying this: "I'm disappointed but not surprised that President Trump has decided to terminate the protection previously provided by the United States Secret Service." He says, notwithstanding my criticisms of President Biden's national security policies, he nonetheless made the decision to extend that protection to me in 2021. The Justice Department filed criminal charges against an Iranian Revolutionary Guard official in 2022 for attempting to hire a hitman to target me. That threat remains today, as also demonstrated by the recent arrest of someone trying to arrange for President Trump's own assassination. The American people can judge for themselves which president made the right call. And of course, we're not going to ask the question of whether or not a president should do this, to go after his critics, to go after his enemies. But if you could spell out the situation John Bolton has found himself in for being in the room back in January of 2020. I remember when Donald Trump, as president then, ordered the strike to take out IRGC commander Soleimani, and it killed him in Baghdad, and it was very controversial. And John Bolton has had a target on his back ever since, but now no Secret Service detail. What do you make of it?
Well, there was a number of officials around President Trump when that decision was made to basically do a strike mission on Soleimani when he was in Iraq. It was a drone strike mission. Took him out. Obviously, the Iranians were very upset because he was the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. He was over the head of the Al-Quds force, and it was a very, very high-profile strike. And so, based on that, all the information out there is that the Iranians had decided that they were going to strike back and they were going to do assassination missions. There have been a number of things have popped up. He referenced one, but a number of what were clearly Iranian plots to assassinate U.S. officials. He was one. Mike Pompeo was another, is my recollection. There was like 3 or 4. And of course, also President Trump was on that list as well. Very involved. You know, the Iranians are fairly sophisticated.
Right.
It is a clearly an active plot. Now, with that said, as a former government official, you don't normally rate Secret Service security detail. That is rather unusual. It's rather exceptional. There has to be a rather big reason for that to happen.
Right.
They have to have a clear threat. There could be something that they have decided. Maybe there's something with the Iranians, because the Iranians last week, I believe it was, I don't remember, it might have been the Iranian president said, it was kind of interesting wording. He said, we were not trying to assassinate President Trump while he was campaigning. And I was like, well, that's a rather interesting choice of terms. So were you trying to assassinate President Trump? Anyway, if you get the idea, it was rather a very scripted or very tight choice of terms that he used. But then again, there's these others that fall into there, Bolton being one of them. And the question is, are they still targeting him? Now, there could be some communication, possibly. I'm speculating here that they feel that the threat has diminished, or it just could be that it's a decision, just to simply say, hey, look, he doesn't rate Secret Service protection, and we're going to pull it back. Obviously, time will tell if that was a good idea or not, depending on what happens to well, not just Bolton, but Pompeo and some of the others.
Yeah, Trump was asked about this today in his back and forth with reporters that went on for about 40 minutes. He said, you can't have that for life. You shouldn't have that for life, in response in regard to the Secret Service detail protection John Bolton was afforded and had been afforded since 2021. Hal, as always, I know we went a little long, but there was a lot to get to. It's a new administration, and we're definitely going to be relying on your expertise throughout it. Thanks so much. Talk soon.